I think give us a perspective. I would on your third question actually is the first. I'm going to ask Kishore. Basically, you predict the rivalry between U.S. and China, and you say that the U.S. is maybe ahead in 10 years, and then China will eventually catch up. And what the U.S. is trying to do is to prevent China catch up. That is where the conflict coming from. And then last year, one of the speakers, Graham Allison, in his book, the Destined for War. What is that series? I don't know how to pronounce it. To say the C series, So the Destined for War, But so back to this, what is the end game? What can you analyze for us? What is the U.S. trying to do at the end? Keep knocking China down, and what is China trying to do? And Xi Jinping recently said that he has no intention for become a superpower. He said Chinese is peace loving. They have relations with a lot of other countries. They don't try to impose its own value to other countries. So maybe you can share some light with us about what U.S. trying to aim in the end. What is China trying to aim in the end?
First of all, let me begin by joining by saying that was an excellent presentation, and I'm glad you brought out the economic, financial, and technological dimensions, because they're also going to make the world a much more complicated place. And I think one statistic you provided that I think all of us should pay attention to is the size of the U.S. national debt, which is now already 125% of GNP, and debt servicing may soon cost more than the U.S. defense budget. And that will also eventually have geopolitical implications, because if the American people get tired of having to pay for this debt, and they have to choose between cutting down on internal commitments and external commitments, logically, the American people will say, we will keep our internal commitments, our social security, our entitlements, and we will cut our external commitments. And that, I think, will be Taiwan's nightmare 10 years from now. Because all of the policies, many of the policies of Taiwan are predicated on the basis that you will have the eternal support of one superpower. But that eternal support may not be eternal, may be time-bound. And if it goes away, which is a realistic possibility, what is your plan B? Any country, every country in the world at a time of changing geopolitical, environment, you must have a plan A and you must have a plan B. Because if you only have plan A and it doesn't work and it crashes, then is a prescription for trouble. I think that's what your presentation brings out. Now, in the case of what is the ultimate goal of United States and China?
Yes, China.
And that's why I wrote my book, Has China Won? And I wrote the book, you mentioned that I'm perceived to be pro-China. I'm actually pro-Singapore. And I'm trying to help both US and China navigate a better outcome. And in my book, Has China Won? It was Henry Kissinger who gave me the main insight, which is that the United States has launched a contest against China without first working out a comprehensive long-term strategy. So there's no clear end game of the United States. And essentially...
But now they have a strategy. They want to prevent China becoming number one. That's their strategy.
No, they have an attitude of wanting to prevent China from becoming number one. They don't have a strategy that spells out, I will do A, B, C, D, E, and then that will stop China from becoming number one. So, and that's what Kissinger is implying. If you just impose tariffs, any economist will tell you that when United States impose tariffs on Chinese products, China doesn't pay for the tariffs. American consumers pay for the tariffs. And the deficit hasn't gone down, right? So it hasn't worked. The efforts to stop China's technological development cannot succeed. And in fact, even the economists came out with a cover story saying China is today a scientific superpower. So where is your strategy? What you have to, if you have a strategy, you got to document. In the case of the Soviet Union, it was successful because United States cut off the Soviet Union from the rest of the world. And the Soviet Union then collapsed. China, and I'm glad you used the word geo-economic, China is more integrated with the rest of the world than the US economy is. So the United States cannot isolate China. So, there's no clear practical goals that the United States has identified for itself. And as a friend of the United States, I would say, you don't have a game plan. Whereas by contrast, China does have a game plan. You mentioned BRI. Now, BRI was not designed by China out of any sense of altruism. China wasn't going out there with a big heart trying to save the world. China was doing something that is in China's long-term interests. To have countries have such deep connections with China that they won't give up they won't contain China. So whatever China has been doing, therefore, is part of a systematic, comprehensive strategy. And the United States, as of now, doesn't have a matching strategy. And so for the people of Taiwan, you got to figure out, in a contest between someone who has a strategy and someone who doesn't have a strategy, are you betting on the right horse? Right? So these are the sort of hard questions that you have to answer. But at the end of the day, I also believe that in the conclusion of my book, Has China Won?, I emphasize that both United States and China will be better off if they press the pause button on the US-China contest and focus instead on common global challenges, which you also mentioned, like climate change, like pandemics, and so on and so forth. So the end goal of all those of us who are not in the US-China contest should be to encourage both to find ways and means of getting along for the benefit of the global community.
So U.S. and China should find a way to cooperate rather than compete, and killing each other. And that's also what the cross-strait Taiwan and China should do. So my next question to Suu Kyi, Professor, is we know that Xi Jinping's goal is 和平统一, peaceful reunification, but we seem moving away from that. The William Lai's insistence about the sovereign status of Taiwan, and is now that is getting very sensitive. So how and now, according to you, there are no dialogue, let alone cooperation. So how can we lead us to a peaceful reunification, please?
Well,
麦克风打开了，可以讲。
as I said in my PowerPoint, there are only two peaceful ways to unification, and one is already dead.
靠近。
One is already a dead end, and the other one is U.S.-China, and that depends more on U.S. and China. So I want to go back to Joanna's first question. That has to do with your question too, because without the U.S. now holds the key. U.S. is always the driver in U.S.-China relations. U.S. is still the superpower, the driver of the world, not politically and economically. There's no doubt about that. And, of course, peace in this region. So I think the question to ask is not what kind of policy, as in your question, what kind of policy either one will take. The question is necessarily in this order. First, who is going to win? Harris or Trump? Secondly, by what margin? This question is oftentimes ignored, neglected. Third, what policy he or she will take. So this is the third question. But I think we should start from the first question. Who will win? Frankly, I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to pretend that I'm expert. I'm not. And I don't even want to venture to guess. But what I do know is the second question, unfortunately, right now, is more important than the first question, because the guy or the lady who wins will have to win big in order for the country, for the U.S., to return to normal life. If not, if Trump wins big or loses big, the U.S., my hunch, will plunge into some sort of disorder. Let me explain. The previous election, Trump lost by 3 million popular votes. He claimed that all these 3 million are voted by the illegal immigrants. So next time, if he loses again by small margin, let's say 3 million, or maybe a little bit more, he would say again, once again, my victory is stolen by Democrats, and his crowd would rise up in arms. There are 300 armed militias in the U.S. right now. 200 of them are Republican inclined, and 100 is Democrat inclined. And out of the violence committed in the last 3-4 years, again, 2/3, according to a U.S. police report, 2/3 are by the Republicans' armed militia. So if he wins, if he loses by small margin, U.S. will plunge into chaos and over the country. I cannot predict where. So and we don't have to even talk about policy, because this question would consume our energy for quite a few months. And if he wins by small margin, and let's assume Democrats will take it lying down. I'll live with it. Too bad. We accept the result. Then it's okay. If not, if the 100 armed militia inclined toward Democrats, if they would rise up somewhere, also it's a smaller scale violence. But if the Democrats take it lying down, and Donald Trump will be very much a lot of people in the U.S. now calling him a dictator, and I agree. He will be a dictator because he will be untouchable. He would be an Iron Man, political Iron Man, 钢铁人. Nobody can touch him, because he has brought together all the Republicans, all the people who were moderate Republicans, either kicked out or they gather around him. So this time I look at his campaign. The discipline shown by his campaign team is much better than previously, which means his control of his people is much more solid than before, which will go into his administration. He will not be treated as a child by McMaster, by Mark Milley, and the type. They treat him as a child. They need supervising by the adults. So he will be the adult. And again, if he happens to win one of the houses or the Senate, he would be even more powerful. Most importantly, the judiciary is 7-2 in his favor in the Supreme Court. So out of the 3 powers, he would have at least two. At least 2. He will be dictator. He can do anything he wants. So what he will do, I think most likely he will, quote unquote, reform the federal government. I happen to have found a footnote. It's a small footnote in a very thick book. I happen to see it. It's done by it's a Bloomberg opinion survey. which asked 12,000 federal officials who donated to 2020 campaign. Asked them, whom did you donate to? 84%, guess what? 84% to Biden, and not to Donald Trump. No wonder Donald Trump always suspected that there's a deep state. There's a deep state in federal government. 84%, not surprisingly. So at the same time, Democrats control media. I would estimate at least 85% of the media. And academia, most of the elite universities, and entertainment, Hollywood, and the medical, medicine area. I mean, just about. I mean, Democrats really are in solid control of the country. So if he's voted into the administration, and I think he would have changed, revamp. So and of course on foreign policy, he would also be able to do whatever he wants, so the margin counts. But the problem with Donald Trump is that he just may, according to my study, my understanding of the U.S. military, he just may split the U.S. military. It may sound surprising to most of you. U.S. military is a very disciplined, hardcore, seasoned, battle ready, and all that. But it just so happened in the past few years, not that long, 10 years, maybe 15 years, the war, aside from war fatigueness, there's a racial issue. So the whites, most of the white soldiers in the military are from the red states, the Midwestern. Like J.D. Vance is a good example. J.D. Vance is a good example. I mean, they had no hope. Only 4% of those white boys, poor white boys, have a chance to get into the large cities, and like J.D. Vance. Most of others stay in their hometown, jobless, drug abuse, and violence and all that. Mm-hmm. So those go into the military is the only salvation. So these white soldiers in the military are, I would surmise, pro-Trump. Unfortunately, the black and Latinos, to lesser extent, Latino men are half Republican, half Democrat, and Latino women are more Democrat than Republican. But the Latinos, blacks, and they are much less pro-Trump. So we'll have a split in the military.
It is interesting.
So it's dangerous. It's dangerous. The U.S. will be a very different country this year and next. So the margin counts, and we don't have to worry about our problem until we get cleared on this problem.
Okay, thank you. My next question is also to Keisha. Earlier you mentioned about your long-serving, and I recall 10 years in United Nations. So you do understand how United Nations work. In fact, that our government, or President Lai in particular, is now also trying to influence the United Nations. Perhaps you can try to share with us. I don't know whether you are aware that there's a resolution called 2758. Basically, it's recognizing one China. But then the United States now, or William Lai, is saying that yes, one China, PRC, one China. But Taiwan is not that one China. So we are just trying to maneuver it. What the Suu Kyi, in the past proposed what he called the strategic, the vagueness. But then what Taiwan government is now pushing is strategic clarity. Taiwan is a sovereign, the country status. What's your view from your understanding about United Nations?
Well, I must say I'm not quite sure. I'm a bit confused about this efforts of Taiwan to amend the UN resolution. It's obviously a UN General Assembly resolution. But for a start, it's impossible to amend that resolution in the UN Security Council because China has a veto. So the Security Council is out. Now, even in the General Assembly, any efforts to change a resolution against the wishes of the government of China will fail. Because for a simple reason, that if you give the countries of the world a choice, do you want to vote in favor of a resolution that pleases Taiwan and angers China? What do you get? What do you get out of it? And at the end of the day, China's standing in the global south has never been higher. You know, you see that in the way that the African leaders went to Beijing for this conference. Even in Latin America, China's influence today is incredibly high. So I'm a bit puzzled by the political naivete of the people who are trying to push to amend a resolution in the United Nations. But nonetheless, maybe it's worth for them to try. Because when they try, they will fail so spectacularly.
Maybe they do not try to amend, but try to interpret it in a different way.
No, I mean, there's no point interpreting for yourself. You have to get the countries of the world to explain and understand the meaning of that resolution. But if any goal is to sort of ask countries to choose, do you favor an independent Taiwan? The vast majority of countries in the world will not support an independent Taiwan because they have already signed to a one China policy, and they'll be happy to work with the Taiwan that exists today. They're happy to work with the status quo. But if you try to change the status quo, any change will leave Taiwan worse off and not better off, because countries in the world are not going to support this. And this is a fundamental major reality. And I also emphasize that you also are living in a world where the influence of the West overall is coming down. I mean, very sadly. I mean, I say this out of sadness because I've seen how Europe has diminished dramatically on the world stage. I mean, if you want to understand why countries will not, for example, if you ask them to choose even between China and Europe, in 1980, the combined GNP of the European Union economies was 8 times bigger than China. Now, Europe and China are about the same size. By 2050, Europe's combined GNP will be half the size of China. So, clearly, everybody's got to adjust to a rising China. And I think if Taiwan's got to understand, that doesn't mean, by the way, I'm going to emphasize this, that Taiwan has to kowtow to China, or Taiwan has to sacrifice itself. No. But Taiwan's got to be geopolitically extremely shrewd and cunning in managing a difficult geopolitical environment. And any kind of political naivete is very dangerous for the people of Taiwan. You must understand the real state of the world as it is, and not as a state, not the kind of, you cannot afford to have wishful thinking in geopolitics. And by the way, if just as an aside, let me mention, you asked about what Asia's geopolitical future also here. You know, most people in Taiwan are not aware that one key reason why there has been no major war in East Asia for 45 years is because there's an organization called ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, that has done a remarkable job of being able to convene all the great powers to come and attend ASEAN meetings every year. And then ASEAN provides the opportunity for everyone to talk to each other. And this is an incredible contribution by ASEAN to the peace of Asia. And the sad part is, most people in Taiwan don't even know this. But this is your geopolitical environment. You must understand what are the forces that can lead to a war.
We are excluded. We are not in RCEP. We are not in CPTPP.
Yeah. But this is where you got to understand the forces that are at play.
Following on that, very interesting you mentioned Southeast Asia, ASEAN, and I myself in particular, the organizer of the event, set up a organization called SIA, Southeast Asia Impact Alliance. And a lot of things not only happened in cross-strait in Taiwan lately, but also more so in Southeast Asia, in particular Philippines, South China Sea. So there are people seeing now that what's happening in South China Sea probably is even more dangerous than Taiwan. Do you want to comment on that? People say maybe some war or whatever, confrontation going on there, and then and also we are in the conjunction of U.S. election, and then it's the things out of control, and the U.S. is too busy on its domestic election, cannot control it, and Taiwan may be in danger. Well, what's your view?
Well, I would say that the South China Sea, there are some potential problems. There have been skirmishes. You've seen the skirmishes between China and the Philippines. Although I want to add a very important point here. Neither China nor the Philippines has fired a gun, which is very significant, This is something you must notice. The weapons that are being, you showed us the pictures of Ukraine, you showed us the picture of Gaza. How would they look if they use water cannons instead of real cannons, right? So the reason I emphasize that dimension is that the Asians know how to exercise restraint, and they have exercised restraint in that area. So South China Sea, there are challenges, but again remember that we've had these challenges for several decades now, and China has had difficulties with Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Philippines, and until recently there were no incidents. But I can tell you that in the back room there is a lot of diplomacy going on, a lot of diplomacy. And the most distressing statistic that was given by Suu Kyi is that you used to have 20 channels of communication with China, and now you have 0. That is incredibly dangerous, because you must always establish your channels of communication before a crisis. Don't wait for the crisis to come and set it up. And by contrast, so you understand the difference, among the ASEAN countries, and ASEAN is the most diverse region of planet Earth, we have over 1,000 meetings a year. Over 1,000. Can you imagine every day the face-to-face contact and the trust and confidence in each other that is built up by these constant meetings? So when you go from 20 meetings to having 0, you are creating a very dangerous, vulnerable point. And that's why ASEAN, in many ways, teaches the rest of the world how to do things.
Yeah, it is very interesting that you mentioned ASEAN. Our government has this 新南向政策 new southbound policy, and out of the 10 countries in Southeast Asia, Singapore is neutral. And Philippines is pro-United States, pro-American, but the other 8 are all pro-China. So the only country that Taiwan now feels comfortable doing business with in Southeast Asia is the Philippines. So I heard from my contacts say, very bullish on Philippines. But then all the other countries, simply because they are doing business or slightly toward China, our government feel hesitated to do business with them. So I just want to explain.
But I have to qualify that. The other 8 are not pro-China. In fact, most of the 10 ASEAN countries want to be good friends with China and good friends with the United States.
Neutral.
And so far, we have succeeded. And by the way, there are enormous reservoirs of goodwill towards the United States in Southeast Asia, by the way. Southeast Asia is not anti-American. Southeast Asia is very friendly. In fact, when American congressmen and senators come to visit Southeast Asia, they get a very warm welcome. Now, in the case of the Philippines, you must also remember that when they had President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, she was pro-China. When they had President Aquino, pro-US. They had President Duterte, pro-China. President Marcos, pro-US. So, when you have
Every 4 years.
when you have a country that swings like that, it can create some confusion. So I actually tell my Filipino friends that in geopolitics, you must work out a consistent bipartisan policy. And the wisest people in Southeast Asia, wisest country is Vietnam. Because in Vietnam, they have a saying that to become a leader of Vietnam, you must be able to stand up to China and you must be able to get along with China. If you cannot do both, you cannot be a leader of Vietnam. And that's what the countries in Southeast Asia also are trying to do. So, in diplomacy, a lot can be achieved if you're careful, subtle, and sophisticated in your approach and not black and white in doing your things.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification and the great insight. I want to ask you the last question before I open to the floor. We talk about, you also talk about the decline of the West, the rise of Asia, and the decline of America, United States, and the rise of China. We can see in so many cases, technology. Apple just launched iPhone 16, and Huawei launched a new folded three-way. The cell phone that is unparalleled, and then the BYD now is already way ahead Tesla, and then and also if you look at the space, the U.S. is in trouble. 2 of their astronauts are stuck in the space, and the 8 days mission become 8 months nightmare, and then but these are rising China, the inevitable trend. How will U.S. counter that? And Taiwan is in particular in a sensitive position because the only thing China is maybe not so good is chips, semiconductor. Taiwan is very strong, and U.S. also trying to control that. So what I'm seeing is the first question. This Asia rise seems inevitable, and we are very tricky in an extremely sensitive time. Taiwan is a very sensitive period, and Taiwan with the great technology of semiconductor chips also caught in between. What's your advice to Taiwan?
Well, I must emphasize that when I talk about the decline of the West, it's a relative decline, not absolute decline. I mean, the Western countries will still remain wealthy countries. They're not going to go into poverty. But their relative share of the global GNP is shrinking. And also when I talk about Asia, it's not just about China. You have 1.4 billion people in China, you have 1.4 billion people in India, and India is going to do very well. The Indian economy is already the 5th largest economy, it will be the 3rd largest economy by 2030. And then you have ASEAN with 700 million people. So it is a combination of what I call the new CIA, China, India, ASEAN.
Wow, CIA.
CIA. The new CIA that is happening. And so on your question of technology, it's very clear that TSMC must retain the trust and confidence of the US government. Very important. Because if you lose it, then people in Washington DC may advocate crazy options. You had the former presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. I'm sure you know what he said. He said what the United States should do, if in case China invades Taiwan, the United States should bomb TSMC, destroy it completely so that China gets nothing. Now that's a very irresponsible statement by an American leader. But it shows you, therefore, how you got to be geopolitically sophisticated. And in the case of TSMC, because the United States regards it as so important, you have to retain the trust and confidence of the United States. But on the other side, I've said this in an article which I published with the former president of Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Tony Chan. all the efforts to stop China's technological development cannot succeed. Because China has shown time and again that when you try and stop China, China overcomes it. They tried to stop China from having nuclear weapons. China developed its own nuclear weapons. United States refused to cooperate with China in outer space. China set up its own international space station. And as you can see, right now Chinese astronauts can travel out and back more easily than American astronauts can, which is quite a remarkable change. So in this game, therefore, what we need to do is very gradually and slowly persuade American policymakers that all their efforts to try and stop China are not going to work. Instead, what we should all be doing is learning to work with a new China that is strong and powerful. And the good news is that at this stage, the Chinese leaders are happy to work with the rest of the world to create a rules-based multilateral order that will work in the interest of all powers, including United States, including China, including Southeast Asia and everyone else. So we still have the opportunity to have a better world if we press the pause button on the US-China geopolitical contest.
Thank you so much for the good advice. We're now open to questions. We have an extremely intelligent, inquisitive audience here. Anybody would like to, please raise your hand. 工作人员准备好麦克风，看看问问题。We have anybody would like to ask questions? Yes, Paul. 前面麦克风的前面，工作人员跑过来。
I would like to ask a question to Kishore. Okay, you are Indian, living in Singapore, Singapore citizen. I would like to ask a question. What do you view on China and India in the future? Okay, it seems to me they are not get along very well, and a lot of border incidents. Okay, what's your view? Do you think that China and India will get along in the future, or it is because U.S. is pushing India against China? Thank you.
Well, I can tell you that I share your concern, Paul, about the future of China-India relations. Because China-India relations today, they're not bad, they're very bad. Unfortunately, relations were quite good until about, I would say, 4.5 years ago. They were both, in fact, the two leaders who had spent more time meeting each other was the Prime Minister of India, Modi, with President Xi Jinping. But unfortunately, there was an incident in June 2020 in Galwan at the border between China and India where Chinese and Indian soldiers died. And that has set back relations between China and India quite badly. But having said that, I think both sides also realize they have to keep their relations stable. So, for example, even though there are no bilateral meetings between the Chinese leader and the Indian leader, they meet regularly in multilateral settings. So they meet at meetings of G20, they meet at meetings of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, BRICS. So there are ways and means. So I think as of now, especially after the election of Prime Minister Modi, now I think both sides are going to try and see if they can stabilize their relationship a bit. India and China will never become close friends, but if they can just have a normal working relationship, then I think that will be okay. That's the best you can aspire to have.
有没有下一个问题？请举手。We have the next. Oh, at the end, 最后面，刚才戴眼镜那位先生。对，就这位先生，麻烦您站起来，让他能看到。
Well, I have a question for Joanna. I think for Asian countries, you're saying that you can be friends with both China and the U.S. at the same time. What's your view on the Malacca Strait? Would that be a point of contention in case right now we have economic war and also maybe some tension in Taiwan Strait? But should the case be maybe the military confrontation start to heat up, would Malacca Strait be a point of contention. I have a second question, but that's for Kishore. For us, we are not in a position of power, not in Taiwan, not in the US, nor in China. So for people like us, more pragmatically, how do we position ourselves, I mean investments-wise, to navigate this tough water for the next 10 years?
Street. I worked in Singapore for 7 years. Malaysia is my second home. I go all the time. Of course, it's one of the major choke points in the world. So when we look at choke points in the world, actually a lot of them are inflamed. Look at Suez Canal, look at the southern tip of the Red Sea, and so on and so forth. So if there are additional tension, because India is also working in occupying one of the islands next to the Malacca Strait. So if there were additional tensions, I think the other plans will be executed or accelerated, such as the Thailand Canal Plan or other plans to bypass the Malacca Strait, which will be quite terrible, to be frank, for Singapore as a very major harbor and free port for the world trade. But there will be other plans, especially for oil and gas transportation and the lifeline of all the transportation. So now if we look at the world around us, there are 3 or 4 major choking points. One is Taiwan Strait, the other is Malacca Strait. And these two, if going into any kind of trouble, then the United States has a new thesis. This is a new playbook. It didn't happen before. The new playbook is the tension across Taiwan Straits is jeopardizing world economy and jeopardizing the flow of goods across the world. And that would be another way of getting international involvement for a potential conflict in Taiwan Straits. And may I just add, this is a new playbook. It didn't happen before. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Next question, please. Oh, yes. Sorry.
Yes. Your question is, what can people like you do if you have no influence? And I would say it's very important for the public in Taiwan to also understand why is Taiwan in such a dangerous situation. The people must understand this. And some effort must be made to educate them. Because what is tragic here is that it's so easy to avoid war in Taiwan. Very easy. Right? Keep the status quo. But why risk it then? Why try to nibble away and try little things here, little things there, little things there, when they will not in any way enhance your security and in fact endanger your security? So Taiwan needs to exercise a tremendous amount of strategic discipline and being extremely careful if you want to preserve the peace here. But the people must be aware of it. So the people must also be told. And here the advantage we had in Singapore is that the founding generation of Singapore's leaders, and I discussed that in my memoirs, Living the Asian Century, Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Keng Swee, Rajaratnam, they were geopolitical geniuses. Geniuses. And that's how I learned so much from them. And they understood what you need to do when you need to speak out and when you need to keep absolutely quiet. Just say nothing. And quite often, in many diplomatic situations, saying nothing is the best thing to do. So Taiwan should therefore learn to take an extremely low profile and be very, very careful of people who fly here claiming they want to defend you. I mean, Nancy Pelosi did an incredible amount of damage to Taiwan. There's nothing positive that came out of her visit, except that she became famous in the United States. So if people like that come to help you, be careful. They only want to use you as a stepping stone for their personal needs. And if you suffer, that's of no consequence to them.
We have time for one last question, if there's any. Over there. 前面这边拿麦克风过来，工作人员。
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Mukhabani. If China take over Taiwan in the future, will there be a big impact on the geopolitical structure, either in Asia or in the world? And do you think United States can afford that big impact?
Yeah, the question is that if China does take over the Taiwan, the impact will be a tremendous phenomenon. Like Nikki Haley said, 10 trillion. Can U.S. afford not to look into the situation? Basically, not to protect Taiwan, to let China invade Taiwan. The consequences will be the unbelievable.
Well, I think certainly the United States will be happy to provide weapons, logistics, and so on and so forth. But will the United States send its soldiers to come and defend Taiwan? And up to now, there has been a very clear implicit understanding among all the nuclear powers that their soldiers will not confront each other on the battlefield because there's a danger of escalation leading to a nuclear war. And even in the case of Ukraine, there is actually a UN General Assembly resolution condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So the Russian invasion of Ukraine is illegitimate under international law. If the United States may want to try and support Ukraine directly, but they understand very clearly that if they put US soldiers fighting Russian soldiers fighting American soldiers, it will lead to escalation and maybe a nuclear war. So since China is a nuclear power and United States is a nuclear power, the likelihood of American soldiers coming in is very, very low. And in a sense, basically, you will be on your own.
Thank you. With Keisha's remarks, I think all of us learn a lesson. I think we need to think hard, not just ourselves, our companies, our government leaders. I want to thank you once again. We are coming to the end of today's event. Keisha and Professor Suchi and Jonah are coming to this event. I want to thank my co-organizer, the Katie Lee Foundation and the Fairwind Foundation, and most of all, I want to thank all of you. All of you care about politics. You made today's events happen. I think this is we don't have an answer, but we do have a lot of thinking. I think the key things are to avoid war, and we are seeking peace. And Keisha's recommendation is even for U.S. and China is to cooperate rather than confront. We all learned a great deal. Once again, 再一次热烈的掌声给他们。And thank you, everyone. This concludes today's event. Keisha needs to go to the airport now.
朋友都知道我是很挑剔的，防晒乳我选 KISS 皇家呵护抗光清爽高防晒凝露，因为它有媲美蓝光神盾的抓藻植萃，保护我在阳光下延缓肌肤老化，维持青春弹力，可以防御工作环境里的3C 商品，各种光源对肌肤的伤害，擦起来清爽不黏腻。我特别喜欢它做到海洋友善。365天，天天抗光抗老化，是我的保养日常。你呢？呵护您，呵护全家人，专属你的 KISS Royal Care 抗光清爽高防晒凝露。